So we've now done the 101 for all 4 disc profiles. I want to add a little more context for you to make sure you're really understanding which disc is which. You're going to have a quadrant in front of you. And we're going to label this quadrant a little bit here. So, at the top of the quadrant, like right extrovert. At the bottom, right introvert. On the left side of the quadrant, right people-oriented. And on the right side, right task-oriented. Here is the disc quadrant for you. Each one of these 4 results falls into one of these quadrants. One of these disc profiles is a task-oriented introvert. Another one is a people-oriented extrovert. Another quick way to sum up these 4 different profiles. So before I tell you what goes where, let's give yourself a pop quiz here. Pause the video and take a moment to guess, where does the D go? Which quadrant? Where does the I go, the S go, the C go? Take a guess here, and I'll give you the answers here right after this. Okay, let's see how you did. So how about that top right? That should be the task-oriented extrovert in the top right. If you guessed D, you are correct. That's where the D goes. That's the D portion of this quadrant. A D, another way to think of them, is a task-oriented extrovert. So, what about a people-oriented extrovert? That would be the top left quadrant. If you put an I there, spot on, 2 for 2, high I's are people-oriented extroverts. So where do you think the S belongs? If you picked the bottom left, the people-oriented introvert, you are correct, 3 for 3, and that leaves us with the last quadrant, the bottom right one, a task-oriented introvert. That's your high C for you. So another quick way to boil these results down. Are they task-oriented? Are they people-oriented? Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Really great way to lean back and remember, so what exactly is a D versus an S? Now, when we think of a D and their characteristics, what they're all about, another way to maybe flesh this out is to, let's apply some stereotypical careers, positions, or professions that high Ds might be naturally drawn to. Again, think of typical careers or positions within companies. Well, we know Ds want to be in charge, so hopefully you put down boss or CEO. You're going to often find a D pursuing or holding a CEO, head of the company type position. Leadership roles, right? Being top dog. You also often see high Ds in doctors and lawyers. Now all of these examples aren't universal, but it's something to lean on. It's something stereotypically that stereotypically has some accuracy to it. Now the high I. What type of profession would you expect to see a high I in? There's one big one we're looking for here. High I's, more than anything, the most major, one thing you often find a high I in is the world of sales. Being in sales. That is often where a high I gravitates to. You know, another thing we often think of is maybe like a promoter, an advocate of some sort, a spokesperson, but that term, a salesperson, is just almost synonymous with high I. Okay, let's move down to those S's. The steady, the stable. So we've got these team players here, these supportive folks. So we're talking teachers, nurses, administrators, those people who are there to help everything run smoothly, to help out and just run this thing and work together effectively. Lastly, the C's. What do you think about those C's, those conscientious calculators? Very data-driven, very numbers-oriented these C's are. Finances, If you said IT, architecture, engineering, you are on the right track. Typical professions we would see high C's fall into. So we've helped you have this quadrant to identify a D as, again, a task-oriented extrovert and so on. We've given you some typical careers that you could maybe expect to see each disc fall into. Now let me explain something to you as you're looking at that quadrant. The truth is, it is so rare that someone is purely just a high D or purely just a high C. Our results that we get back, and you should have some you can look at for yourself if you haven't already. Our results aren't just 1 and we're just 0% across the other 3. We are a combination of all 4 of those. So more often than not, when we're talking about someone in real life, we're not just going to say they're a high D. They're going to be the culmination of perhaps their top 2 results. So we're talking DI type of people, DC type of people. You're going to have SCs, SIs, CDs, CSs, IDs, ISs. Notice I didn't say a DS or SD or an IC or CI. Now, why might that be? Well, if you're looking at the quadrant, quite literally, those respective profile results are polar opposites of each other. How can you be a people-oriented introvert and also be a task-oriented extrovert all at once? S and D are at opposite ends of each other. Same with the I's and the C's. Again, I mentioned conflict earlier in one of these videos. Here is where some major potential for conflict can occur is when an I and a C are trying to work together or a D and an S are trying to work together. They are just wired literally in different ways. Here's where we need to mirror and match and have some skills at identifying all the different results, all the different profiles, so we can try and adapt from our natural selves, because how you are wired, guaranteed there's different types of people out there who are just the opposite of you. So those folks, especially, if you're a high S, how can you put extra effort into mirroring and matching a high D? If you're a D, vice versa, how can you get through to a high S? If you're an I, how can you work with a C? Vice versa. It is so important to be aware of that and to know that there will never really be such thing as an IC, a CI, a DSSD. It's a unicorn. So people are more complicated, for sure. But again, they will always have their top disc result that's driving the boat, the proverbial boat of how they operate. And you'll be able to identify that first, to know they're a high I, and then right after that be like, okay, are they an IS or an ID? And you'll be able to pick up on that after a few more minutes of interacting with them. This is pretty powerful stuff, being able to read someone, know who they are, and adapt. I can't say that enough. To wrap up here, we're going to do a little pop quiz. Another one. Knowing what you found out about each disc profile, thinking about the world around us, we're going to guess some percentages here. We're going to pause here in a little bit, but I want you to guess what percentage of the world leads with D, what percentage of the world leads with I, what leads with S, what leads with C. Now, of course, all 4 of these percentages must total to equal 100% of the world. And I'm really curious to see what you think off the top of your head. Pause this video, take a second to guess, and I'll reveal the answers here shortly. How do you think you did? Let's find out. Let's start with those high Ds. What percentage of the world leads with D? The answer is 3%. Just 3% leads with D. It is very common that people guessing predict a much higher percentage. Let me ask you this. How many CEOs of a company are there? How many presidents of a country are there? How many bosses are there for organizations? 1. Only 3% of the world is a D. Just 3%. Thank goodness, if you were to ask me. Boy, that'd be a lot of personality if there was more than that many Ds in the world. No offense, Ds. Okay, how about those Is? If you guessed 11%, you are correct. Just 11% lead with I. Now this is so interesting. Again, looking at the two extroverted profile types, the D and the I, that totals just 14%. Just 14% of the world is naturally extroverted. People often guess the I being higher than it actually is as well, just like the D. Now, why is that? Well, as far as what you remember, say you're going out to dinner, are you going to remember all of the families and people who just politely had their meal around you and kept to themselves? Or are you going to remember the outrageous couple who caused a scene at their table, who drew your attention? Extroverts, by nature of being extroverted, are remembered because they stand out, right? So it's so fascinating. I think our brains have a skewed perspective on how many people are extroverted because we really only remember those who cause a scene that it's memorable. We don't remember people just keeping to themselves. So don't feel bad if you were way off on how many people in the world lead with those two. It's very common that we predict higher than the truth. So let's go to those S's. The S's. 69%. Almost 70% of the world leads with S. If you are not wired like an S, please, 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 it is so crucial that you learn to mirror and match the S to serve the majority of the world. If you're a D, you got a formidable challenge ahead of you, so good luck. But 70% of the world are S's. And for the C's, that leaves us with 17%. 17% lead with that detail-oriented analytical perspective. 17%. It's fascinating, again, to know how many people are S's. And I don't know about you, but I feel like in our day and age, there's a bit of distrust between leaders in our world. And could it be that part of that distrust is that a high D is the boss of an organization of S's, operating in a completely opposite way than the S's would? That's just one example of the conflict we can see in life. And what if a D was more self-aware that all the people they represented were S's and that they need to adapt to how they see things to maybe better represent them? DISC will be used as a crucial element for role play. Role play being how we practice interacting with people, connecting with people. And boy, I hope you take some time to study it. We will be bringing it up again. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful. Go out into the world. Make it a point to talk to some strangers, if you dare, and when you get home, write down what you think their DISC results were. Sit down with family. Sit down with close friends. Have a conversation and start paying attention to how they're interacting and pick up on their DISC profile. If you start practicing this now, you're going to set yourself up to be a grizzled veteran to understand anyone you come across and how you can help them and get through to them. Thanks for listening to DISC, and good luck.